The sun was already brutal over Fort Bragg, burning down on the firing range as soldiers lined up with their rifles. The air smelled of burnt powder, hot brass, and sweat. Shouts echoed down the line as drill sergeants barked corrections. There. Voices competing with the crack of M4 South. It was the kind of chaos common to qualification days. A blend of excitement, frustration, and nervous energy. And in the middle of it all, barely noticed, stood Private First Class Maria Cortez. Her job wasn't glamorous. She wasn't the one firing downrange or earning scores for marksmanship. She wasn't the drill sergeant correcting stance or the colonel observing progress. No, Maria's role was thankless and invisible. She was the range safety clerk. She checked rifles in and out, distributed ammunition, recorded scores on a clipboard, and quietly enforced the endless rules meant to keep the chaos from turning into tragedy. "Next box, 20 rounds, lane 3, she said softly, sliding a cardboard package of ammunition across the counter. The soldier who took it didn't even look her in the eye. Few ever did. To them, she was part of the background, like the tables, the sandbags, or the targets downrange. A clerk, a paper pusher, forgettable, but if anyone had bothered to look closer, they might have noticed small details that didn't fit. The way her posture was always balanced, weight distributed evenly as if she expected to move at a moment's notice. The way her eyes tracked the entire firing line, not lazily or idly, but with precise awareness, catching which rifle jammed, which soldier jerked the trigger, who forgot to reset their safety. And the way her hands moved, not hurried, not clumsy, but smooth, controlled, economical, as if every action had been practiced 1,000 times before. None of it mattered to the soldiers waiting to shoot. To them, she was the woman behind the desk with a clipboard, the one they complained to when their scores didn't record properly, or when the ammunition boxes didn't open fast enough. Range safety clerk, they called her, with that dismissive tone young soldiers used for anyone outside their little bubble of importance. Some joked she probably hadn't even fired a weapon in her life. Maria never corrected them. She never bragged, never hinted, never even flinched when their careless jokes brushed too close to the truth. She kept her voice calm, her answers short, and her presence small. That was the way she liked it. But invisibility was a double-edged sword. Later that morning, a private stumbled back from the firing line, face pale. His rifle had malfunctioned, a jam caused by his own careless cleaning. He tossed it onto the table in front of Maria. "This thing's a piece of junk," he muttered. Maria didn't scold him. She didn't roll her eyes the way other clerks might have. She simply picked up the rifle, cleared the chamber in two fluid motions, and handed it back to him properly reset. "Next time, check your extractor pin," she said, her tone even. The private blinked, surprised she knew exactly what the issue was. But before he could reply, another soldier shoved forward, and Maria had already turned back to the stack of paperwork. Within seconds, she was invisible again. Only one person had noticed her hands. Colonel Richard Halvorsen stood at the edge of the range, arms crossed, his hat casting sharp shadows over his weathered face. He was watching the soldiers, but his eyes had drifted toward the clerk. She had cleared that malfunction faster than some of his seasoned staff sergeants. He narrowed his eyes. Clerks weren't supposed to move like that. Maria, unaware of his attention, continued with her duties. She collected score sheets, tallied hits and misses, and jotted down notes in her neat, block handwriting. To anyone else, she looked like just another soldier grinding through the monotony of paperwork. But the colonel had been in the army long, enough to recognize small tells, posture, discipline, focus, the little things you couldn't fake. He tucked the thought away for later. That evening, as the range emptied, Maria lingered to close up. The sun was sinking low, throwing long shadows across the sand. Most clerks hurried through their end-of-day tasks, eager to escape, but Maria worked with quiet precision. Each rifle was logged, each round of leftover ammunition counted and sealed. She ran her fingers over the checklists, double-checking every detail until it balanced perfectly. Behind her, 2 young privates gathered their gear, talking just loudly. Enough for her to hear. "Man, can you imagine being stuck with that job?" One laughed. "Just pushing paper all day. Range safety clerk. Boring as hell." "Yeah," the other replied. She probably couldn't hit a target if it was 5 feet away. Maria didn't respond. She didn't even look at them. She simply finished signing off the last form, slipped the clipboard under her arm, and walked away without a word. But later, in the quiet of her barracks room, she sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the floor. The words hadn't stung. Not really. She had been underestimated before, far worse than this. What gnawed at her wasn't their ignorance, but the truth buried underneath their laughter. They didn't know her, and they never would. Maria had chosen this. She had chosen the anonymity, the paperwork, the mindless routines that kept her off the battlefield. But sometimes, late at night, she wondered how long she could keep the facade. She wondered if her past would stay hidden, or if one day someone would look too closely and ask the questions she dreaded answering. The next morning, the range buzzed with activity again. Maria returned to her desk, her face calm, her uniform crisp. To the soldiers, she was the same unremarkable clerk they barely noticed. But Colonel Halvorson's eyes lingered on her again. And this time, he wasn't just watching, he was planning. Because he was certain now, Maria Cortez wasn't just a clerk. She was something else, something dangerous, something the army had buried in plain sight. And before long, he intended to find out exactly what. Asterisk. Rumors at Fort Bragg spread like smoke, invisible at first, then everywhere at once. A careless comment, a chance observation, and suddenly the barracks hummed with speculation. Maria Cortez had been at the range for months, performing her job with quiet precision, but recently soldiers began noticing things that didn't quite fit the label of clerk. It started small. Private Johnson, a lanky kid from Kentucky, had been fumbling with his rifle during qualification week. His shots landed erratically, and frustration burned across his face. He muttered under his breath, "Stupid sights off." Maria, standing nearby with her clipboard, glanced over. She didn't interrupt, didn't lecture. She simply walked up, reached for the rifle, and with a few subtle twists adjusted the sight. Handing it back, she said, "Try again." Johnson shrugged, aimed, and fired. This time, the bullet cut straight through the center of the paper target. He blinked, stunned, then tried again. Another bullseye. Thanks," he stammered, but Maria was already walking away, eyes scanning the line. By that evening, Johnson was telling anyone who would listen. Swear to God she fixed my sight without even looking through it. Like, she knew exactly where the problem was. How does a clerk know that? The others laughed it off at first, but the story stuck. The next incident came during a live-fire drill. Chaos reigned on the line, brass flying, soldiers shouting. Over ear protection, instructors yelling corrections. Amid the noise, one soldier's rifle jammed. He panicked, trying to force the bolt forward, and for a split second, danger hung in the air. Maria was at his side before anyone else reacted. She tapped his shoulder, signaled him to step back, then cleared the weapon in 3 clean motions. Eject, inspect, reload. It was so fast, so practiced, that even the drill sergeant paused mid-shout. She handed the rifle back calmly and returned to her clipboard as though nothing had happened. That night in the barracks, whispers grew louder. Did you see that? She knew exactly what to do. Yeah, clerks don't move like that. You ever notice her posture? Like she's ready for something? I heard she used to be in special forces, but something went down overseas, and now she's stuck here. No way. She doesn't even wear combat patches. If she'd deployed, she'd have at least one. Unless they scrubbed her record. The last line was spoken half-jokingly, but it landed with weight. Soldiers leaned in, lowering their voices, spinning theories late into the night. Maria heard some of the whispers, of course. In the army, walls were thin, and gossip traveled. Faster than bullets. But she ignored them, just as she ignored the stares she sometimes caught when her instincts betrayed her. Like the time she ducked instinctively at the crack of a car backfiring outside the motor pool, dropping into a crouch before she realized it wasn't gunfire. Or the time she scanned the rooftops during a training exercise, eyes sharp and searching, as though expecting an ambush. Small things. Things normal clerks didn't do. She told herself it didn't matter. Rumors faded. Soldiers grew bored. Something new would replace her soon enough. But deep down, Maria knew the truth. Every action, every habit, every reflex she carried was a thread leading back to the life she was trying to leave behind. And threads, once noticed, had a way of unraveling everything. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Maria sat alone at the edge of the range. Her clipboard rested beside her, paperwork completed, rifles logged. The field was quiet now, only the smell of burnt powder lingering in the air. She pulled a small silver locket from beneath her uniform and turned it over in her hands. Inside was a photo, faded, worn, of two faces she hadn't seen in years. Brothers in arms, long gone. She closed the locket quickly, hiding it away. Before the memories cut too deep, she had sworn to bury that life. To trade the weight of a rifle for the simplicity of checklists and clipboards. But the army had a way of keeping its ghosts close, and Maria feared hers were getting restless. Meanwhile, in the barracks, the whispers turned sharper. Bet she's killed people, one soldier muttered over a game of cards. No way. Look at her eyes. Tell me you don't see it. That's not a clerk's stare. That's someone who's been there. Bull. If she was that dangerous, why stick her behind a desk? Maybe that's the point. Hide her in plain sight. Ever think of that? They laughed nervously, but nobody pushed back too hard. The idea had a strange logic. The army was full of things that didn't make sense on the surface. Paperwork trails that vanished, assignments that never showed up in official records, people who appeared from nowhere and disappeared just as quickly. Maria Cortez was becoming one of those mysteries. Colonel Halvorsen overheard some of the rumors himself. He didn't act on gossip, but he filed the observations away. Soldiers often noticed truths before the official paperwork admitted them, and Halvorsen trusted his instincts. He watched her again during another qualification shoot. Maria stood near the line, correcting soldiers' grips with minimal words. One young recruit struggled to keep his rifle steady, his shots scattering wide. Maria leaned in, adjusted his elbow by an inch, shifted his weight slightly, and whispered something he couldn't hear. The recruit fired again. Bullseye. His face lit up. Halvorsen's jaw tightened. That wasn't training a clerk received. That was experience. Deep, hard-earned, costly experience. Later that night, Maria walked alone through the quiet base. The stars shone faintly above, half swallowed by the glow of floodlights. Her boots echoed softly on the pavement. She thought about the whispers, the looks, the colonel's gaze she'd caught more than once. Her chest tightened with unease. She had built this new life carefully, piece by piece. No medals on her uniform, no combat patches. Just enough competence to look professional, but not enough to raise suspicion. A ghost hidden in paperwork, and yet they were starting to see her. She clenched her fists, forcing herself to breathe evenly. Whispers were harmless until they weren't, because whispers had a way of reaching the wrong ears. And Maria knew that if anyone truly uncovered her past, the life she had built here would vanish overnight. By the end of that week, the whispers had spread across the base like wildfire. Nobody knew the truth, but everyone had a theory. To some, Maria was a failed soldier, stuck in a dead-end job. To others, she was a legend in disguise, hiding a past too dangerous to reveal. Maria remained silent. She neither confirmed nor denied. But deep in her chest, the weight of her secrets pressed harder than ever. And somewhere across the base, Colonel Halvorsen was already preparing to test those whispers, to find out just how much truth lay hidden behind the mask of a range safety clerk. Colonel Richard Halvorsen had served in the army for more than 2 decades. He had seen the best and worst of soldiers, green recruits who broke down under fire, and veterans who carried invisible scars long after they came home. Over the years, he had developed a sixth sense, a way of reading people that no classroom could teach. A glance, a movement, a pause too long when certain questions were asked. They all told stories. And Maria Cortez was telling a story she wasn't aware of. It began innocently. Halvorsen was conducting his usual inspection at the rifle range. Qualification season was in full swing, and he liked to see how the younger soldiers were performing. He stood near the bleachers, arms crossed, his sharp eyes scanning the line. Drill sergeants barked at privates who fired too high, too low, too wide. Brass rained against the gravel. The air was hot and thick, with a tang of gunpowder. But Halvorsen's gaze drifted from the line to the small figure behind the tables. Private First Class Maria Cortez, the so-called range safety clerk. She was quiet, efficient, unremarkable, or at least that was how she wanted to appear. But Halvorsen had learned to trust not what people said they were, but what their bodies revealed. He saw how she stood. Not slouched like most clerks, but balanced, weight evenly distributed, as if anticipating movement. He noticed how her eyes weren't glued to the paperwork in front of her, but constantly scanning the firing line, picking up details most drill. Sergeants missed. She corrected soldiers subtly, never drawing attention to herself, but her adjustments were precise. Too precise. One recruit struggled with his breathing. His shots scattered wide. Maria stepped closer, placed 2 fingers lightly on his shoulder, and whispered something. He exhaled, fired again. Bullseye. Halvorsen frowned. That wasn't in the manual. That was field experience. That was someone who had been there. Later that afternoon, as the range quieted, he walked closer under the pretense of casual inspection. Maria was bent over a clipboard, recording scores. Her handwriting was neat, block-style, steady as stone. "How's the line performing today?" Halvorsen asked, his voice low but carrying authority. Maria looked up quickly, almost too quickly, then masked it with a calm expression. "Steady, sir. Average scores, a few standouts." Her tone was respectful, but not nervous. She didn't stumble over words the way many privates did in front of a colonel. Halvorsen tilted his head slightly. "And who's the best shot?" She hesitated only a fraction of a second. "Private Henderson. Consistent grouping. Not a hint of flattery. No guessing. Just the truth, delivered with the certainty of someone who knew what good shooting looked like." Halvorsen gave a curt nod and walked away. Outwardly, it was a routine exchange. Inwardly, his suspicion deepened. That evening, he sat in his office, staring at Maria Cortez's personnel file. It was thin, too thin. Her enlistment papers were clean, no disciplinary marks, no commendations. Training records were vague, almost generic. Basic training. Then an administrative assignment. Overseas history? Classified. The word leapt off the page like a red flag. Halvorsen leaned back in his chair, frowning. He had seen files like this before. They weren't mistakes. They were designed. Someone had gone through this record, stripped out details, and left just enough to make her look ordinary. The colonel tapped his pen against the desk, thinking, who was she really? Over the next week, Halvorsen watched her more closely. He didn't make it obvious, but his eyes always found her on the range. He saw her clear jams with speed and confidence, movements too fast for a clerk. He saw her spot errors in soldiers' form before they fired, corrections that resulted in instant improvements. He noticed how she never flinched at noise, never. Lost focus even when chaos erupted around her. Most telling of all, he saw the look in her eyes. It was a look he had only seen in combat veterans. That sharp stillness, the weight of memory hiding behind calm composure. Young clerks didn't carry eyes like that. Halvorsen felt a flicker of unease. Who had the army buried behind this harmless assignment? And why? One afternoon, he decided to test her. During a break in shooting, he approached her table casually, hands clasped behind his back. Maria looked up, pen still in hand. "Clerk, how's your shooting?" he asked, his tone deceptively light. She blinked, taken off guard by the question. "Sir? Your shooting," he repeated, studying her face. "You're around rifles every day. Surely you've qualified yourself." Maria's eyes flickered. For just a moment, something unreadable flashing behind them. Then she gave a small shrug. "Standard, sir. Nothing special." The words were modest. Too modest. Halvorsen smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We'll see." Then he walked away, leaving Maria standing stiff behind the table, pen frozen above her clipboard. That night, Maria lay awake in her bunk, staring at the ceiling. The colonel's question replayed in her mind over and over. "How's your shooting?" Her hands curled into fists. She hated that it rattled her. She had trained herself to be invisible, to blend in, to never attract attention. But Halvorsen's eyes, they were too sharp. He had seen something. She closed her eyes and forced herself to breathe slowly. One mistake wouldn't unravel everything. She just had to stay calm, stay ordinary. The whispers from the other soldiers were just noise. But the colonel? He was different. If he decided to pull on the thread, everything she'd buried could come loose. Halvorsen, meanwhile, couldn't let it go. The army taught discipline, but it also taught curiosity, the kind that kept soldiers alive. And his instincts screamed at him that Maria Cortez was more than she seemed. In the mess hall, he overheard young privates gossiping again. "She fixed my stance, and suddenly I'm hitting targets I couldn't before. No way, she's just a clerk. I heard she was in some special sniper program. Nah, she's too quiet, probably washed out of something." Halvorsen didn't intervene. He just listened. Soldiers often dressed rumors in exaggeration, but at the core, there was usually a seed of truth. And if there was truth here, it was buried deep, deeper than her file revealed. A week later, Halvorsen made his decision. If Maria Cortez wasn't going to reveal herself willingly, he would push her. Not harshly, not publicly, but enough to see what she was hiding. Because whatever her past was, it mattered. And Halvorsen had no intention of letting a potential ghost walk his range unnoticed. Maria sensed the shift. She caught the colonel watching her more often now, his gaze heavy, measuring. He wasn't treating her like a clerk anymore. He was treating her like a puzzle. And puzzles always got solved. One mistake, one slip, and the life she'd built here, her fragile escape from the shadows, would shatter. She pressed her hands flat against the table one morning, staring at the rifles lined neatly in front of her. Her reflection stared. Back from the steel, calm but taut. The colonel was coming closer, and Maria knew she couldn't stay invisible forever. Colonel Richard Halvorsen had spent his career in the army, learning to trust paper almost as much as people. Files didn't lie, not if you knew how to read them. Service records were more than ink on paper. They were the fingerprints of a soldier's life. Every course taken, every award earned, every mistake made, every battle fought, it all left a mark. So when he opened the manila folder marked Cortez, Maria PFC, he expected at least a basic trail. Instead, he found emptiness. At first glance, the file looked legitimate enough. The usual enlistment forms were there. Date of entry, Meow's classification. The paperwork shuffled through during basic training. A few administrative notes. A transfer order to Fort Bragg. Nothing unusual. But the deeper Halvorsen went, the more wrong it felt. There were no commendations. None. Not a single marksman's badge. Not a ribbon for service overseas. Not even the standard notations that most privates picked up in their first year. Even clerks got recognition for routine efficiency awards. Yet Maria Cortez's file was bare. Training history was vague, almost generic. Basic training, Fort Leonard Wood, completed with satisfactory marks. No details, no drill sergeant signatures, no testing scores. Even more suspicious, her medical records were thin. Soldiers had a trail of injuries, sprained ankles, flu visits, eye exams. Maria's file had 2 entries. Initial physical upon enlistment. Annual dental check. Nothing else. It was as if she had never sweated, bled, or coughed a single day in uniform. Halvorsen leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against the desk. This wasn't a mistake. Files like this didn't happen by accident. Someone had gone through, carefully, piece by piece, and stripped it down. Not sloppily, with surgical precision. The colonel had seen it before. Back when he'd worked briefly with special operations, he'd come across soldiers whose records had been deliberately sanitized. Their true assignments hidden behind walls of classification, their real missions scrubbed from history. On paper, they were nobodies. In reality, they were the sharpest weapons the army possessed. Maria Cortez's file looked exactly like that. And that meant someone, somewhere, had gone to great lengths to bury her past. Curiosity gnawed at him. He slid the folder aside and pulled up his secure terminal. With the right clearance codes, he could dig deeper, cross-reference training databases, search deployment logs. He typed her name, her social security number, her enlistment ID. Results blinked onto the screen, and then stopped. Access restricted. Halvorsen frowned. Restricted? For a clerk? He tried again, this time running her name through a broader system, searching for deployments. No record found. That wasn't right. Even clerks had deployment logs. Even cooks did. Every soldier left a trail, even if it was boring. The army loved its paperwork. But Maria? She left nothing. It was as if she hadn't existed before arriving. At Fort Bragg, the colonel rubbed his temples. He didn't like puzzles he couldn't solve. And Maria Cortez was quickly becoming the biggest puzzle on his base. He reached for the phone on his desk and dialed an old contact at the Pentagon. A major he trusted from years past. Major Davis, the voice answered. Davis, it's Halvorsen. I need a background check on a soldier here. Name's Cortez, Maria, private first class, supposedly a range safety clerk, at her files. Wrong. There was a pause on the line. Papers rustled. Sir, if her file's restricted, I may not be able to... Just check. Quietly, Halvorsen pressed. Another pause. Understood. I'll get back to you. Halvorsen hung up, staring at the folder on his desk. The manila edges seemed heavier now, as if they carried secrets waiting to burst free. Maria, meanwhile, felt the shift in the air. She noticed the way soldiers' gossip grew louder. They didn't try to hide it anymore. Half the barracks buzzed with theories about her past. Some called her a washed-out sniper. Others claimed she'd been part of a classified task force overseas. Most dismissed it as nonsense, but Maria could feel the way eyes lingered on her now, not with dismissal, but with curiosity. She hated it. Worse, she noticed the colonel. He didn't just glance at her now. He watched, carefully, weighing, testing. She could feel his gaze across the range, like the barrel of a rifle aimed at her back. Every instinct screamed that he was digging. One night, Maria sat alone in her barracks room, the locket clutched in her hand again. She tried to steady her breathing, but her chest was tight. She had worked so hard to disappear, to fade into anonymity. She had traded a rifle scope for a clipboard, the battlefield for the range. She had thought she could live quietly this way, but ghosts never stayed buried. And now she could feel them clawing their way back up. She whispered into the silence, as if to the faces in her locket, "I don't want to go back." 2 days later, Major Davis called Halvorsen back. "Colonel," Davis said quietly, "I ran what I could. Officially, PFC Cortez is listed as administrative support, nothing more. But off the record, I found traces of something else." Her ID pinged in a restricted database. Task Force Gray. Halvorsen's brows knit. "Gray? You didn't hear it from me, sir. That's all I'll say. But if she's tied to them, you don't want to push too hard. They bury their people." For a reason, the line went dead. Halvorsen sat frozen, the name echoing in his head. Task Force Gray. He'd only heard whispers of it before, during joint briefings he wasn't supposed to attend. A covert sniper and reconnaissance unit, used in places where the Army officially had no presence. Ghosts within the machine. Soldiers like that didn't just retire into clerical jobs, unless someone wanted them hidden. Maria Cortez wasn't just suspicious anymore. She was dangerous. And he intended to find out just how dangerous. That night, Maria sensed it was over. She could feel the walls tightening. The colonel wasn't going to let this go. And if he uncovered the full truth, if the army pulled her back into the light, everything she had sacrificed to disappear would crumble. She sat at her desk in the dim barracks, staring at her reflection in the black glass of the window. Her face looked calm, but her eyes betrayed her. They weren't the eyes of a clerk. They were the eyes of a sniper haunted by 121 ghosts. And now, one more ghost was coming for her. Colonel Halvorsen. The morning was hot and sharp, the kind of heat that shimmered above the firing range and made even disciplined soldiers restless. Sweat rolled down necks, hands slipped on rifle stocks, and tempers frayed as qualification day pressed on. Cortez moved quietly among the tables as always, clipboard tucked under her arm. She handed out ammunition, recorded scores, cleared the occasional jam. Her motions were steady, efficient, invisible. She told herself she was safe so long as she stayed small, unremarkable. But Colonel Halvorsen had other plans. From the bleachers, Halvorsen watched her with the same intensity he used to study combat zones. His instincts screamed at him. She was hiding. Files didn't lie. Rumors didn't start without fire. And he had seen too many little slips to ignore it now. Today, he would know the truth. At the end of the morning's firing, as soldiers began to break down their rifles, Halvorsen stepped forward. His voice carried with the authority of decades. "Cortez," he called. Every head turned. Maria froze, the clipboard tightening in her grip. She looked up slowly. "Sir, step onto the line." A ripple of surprise went through the soldiers. Clerks didn't shoot on qualification days. Clerks didn't belong on the line. Maria's chest tightened. Sir, that's in order. His tone cut through the air like a knife. Reluctantly, Maria set her clipboard down. Whispers spread behind her as she walked to the firing line, boots crunching against gravel. Soldiers leaned in, smirking, expecting a disaster. The idea of the quiet clerk fumbling with a rifle promised entertainment. Halvorsen gestured to the range officer. Set a target at 900 yards. Gasps, 900. Even seasoned marksmen struggled beyond 6. Maria felt her pulse quicken. She wanted to say no, to refuse, to keep her cover intact. But disobeying wasn't an option. Slowly, she picked up the rifle offered to her, an M2010 sniper system. Heavy and cold in her hands. It felt like an old friend she had promised never to touch again. Anytime you're ready, Halvorsen said. Maria lay prone on the mat, movements instinctive despite years of suppression. She checked the scope, adjusted for wind, calculated distance without even thinking. The world narrowed until only the target remained, a distant silhouette blurred by heat haze. Behind her, soldiers whispered, "No way she hits that. She's just a clerk, man. Watch this." Maria exhaled slowly, the old rhythm returning. Inhale. Exhale. Pause. Squeezed out the rifle thundered. A heartbeat later, the spotter called out, "Bullseye." The range went silent. Maria didn't pause. She reloaded smoothly. Fired again. Bullseye. Again. Bullseye. Each shot struck the target dead center, the grouping so tight it looked like one whole dot. The silence grew heavy, broken only by the mechanical rhythm of her breathing and the clean, precise thunder of the rifle. Within minutes, she had fired 10 shots. All 10 drilled into the center of the target. She lowered the rifle gently, as if setting down something sacred. When she stood, the soldiers were staring at her, not with amusement anymore, but with awe. Halvorsen's face betrayed nothing, but inside, his suspicion hardened into certainty. This was no accident. No clerk in the army could shoot like that. He stepped forward. "Impressive," he said evenly. Maria's eyes flicked to him, calm but unreadable. "Just lucky today, sir." The colonel's jaw tightened. She was still trying to hide. But there was no hiding now. The soldiers erupted into chatter as Maria walked back to her table. "Did you see that? She nailed every single shot. That's not possible. 900 yards? Nobody's that good. She's not just a clerk. No way." Maria ignored them, picking up her clipboard with steady hands. But inside, her stomach churned. This was exactly what she had feared. Attention. Whispers weren't harmless anymore. Now every eye on the base would be on her, and the colonel wouldn't stop. That evening, the mess hall buzzed with the story. Soldiers replayed the scene, exaggerating details, arguing about her past. Some swore she must have been special forces. Others claimed she was a competition shooter before enlisting. But none could deny what they saw. Precision beyond anything they'd witnessed before. Maria sat alone at a corner table, eating quietly, head down. She could feel their stares. She kept her expression blank, but inside she felt the walls tightening. She had given herself away. Back in his office, Halvorsen made notes. Observation. Cortez demonstrated advanced sniper proficiency at extreme distance. Conclusion. File does not reflect true skill level. Next step. Direct confrontation. He closed the notebook and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The army buried people like Maria for reasons, but he couldn't ignore the truth anymore. He needed answers. Later that night, Maria stood outside the barracks under the stars, the cool air brushing her skin. She clenched her fists, heart heavy. She hadn't wanted this. She had wanted to stay hidden, invisible. But the colonel had forced her hand. The shots she fired today weren't just bullets. They were signals. signals to the wrong people, and she knew it was only a matter of time before Halvorsen cornered her and demanded the truth she had spent years trying to bury. The colonel didn't summon her right away. For 2 days after the test, Maria moved through Fort Bragg like a ghost under floodlights, whispers trailing behind her. Everywhere she went, soldiers turned their heads, murmured theories, laughed. Nervously, "She's a ghost sniper. She was Black Ops, I swear it. Bet she's got bodies overseas." Maria ignored them, keeping her face blank. But inside, she knew the game was over. She had fired too clean, too calm, too perfect. Her hands had moved with muscle memory no civilian or desk clerk could fake. The colonel had seen it all. And she knew what came next. On the third evening, as dusk fell across the base, the summons came. "Colonel Halvorsen wants to see you." A sergeant told her flatly. Maria nodded, her stomach tightening like a knot. She walked the familiar path to the administrative building, the gravel crunching beneath her boots, each step heavier than the last. By the time she reached the colonel's office, the world felt suffocatingly quiet. She knocked once. "Enter." The office was dim, lit only by the desk lamp casting long shadows. Halvorsen sat behind the desk, his posture stiff, hands folded in front of him. His eyes locked on her the moment she stepped in, sharp and unrelenting. "Sit." Maria obeyed, lowering herself into the chair across from him. She clasped her hands in her lap to keep them from shaking. The colonel studied her for a long moment, silence stretching heavy between them. Finally, he spoke. "You lied to me, Cortez?" Maria's throat tightened. "Sir, I don't." His voice cut like steel. "You don't hit 900 yards with a grouping like that unless you've lived behind a rifle. That's not luck. That's not a hobby. That's training, years of it. Training the army doesn't give clerks." Maria stared at the desk, jaw tight. Halvorsen leaned forward. "Who are you, really?" For a long time, she said nothing. She had promised herself she'd never speak of it again, that she'd bury that part of her life forever. But Halvorsen wasn't going to stop, and the whispers on base weren't going to fade. If she didn't tell him something, the army would drag the truth out anyway. And if they found her, it would be worse. She inhaled slowly, steadying her voice. "I was a sniper." Halvorsen's eyes narrowed. "Where?" Maria hesitated. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She could feel the weight of the locket in her pocket, like it was burning through her fatigues. "Iraq, Afghanistan, places we weren't supposed to be." The colonel's expression didn't change, but his gaze sharpened. "Which unit?" Maria looked him in the eye at last. "Task Force Gray." Silence fell, heavy and electric. Halvorsen sat back slowly. He had heard the name whispered, half believed. Rumors passed between senior officers. Task Force Gray, the Army's secret hunters, snipers pulled from shadows, deployed where deniability was required. Officially, they didn't exist. Unofficially, they were ghosts with rifles. If Maria was telling the truth, it explained everything, but it also meant she was more dangerous than anyone on his base realized. "You had a kill record," Halvorsen said carefully. Maria's hands trembled slightly in her lap. She didn't want to say it. She didn't want to see the number written in the air again. But she had no choice. 121. The words felt like lead dropping from her mouth. Halvorsen stilled. "Confirmed?" Maria nodded. 121 confirmed kills. She swallowed hard. And more unconfirmed. Too many to count. Her voice cracked then, barely, but she forced herself to continue. "Every single one burned into me. Every single one still follows me. You wanted the truth, Colonel? That's the truth." For the first time, Halvorsen saw the weight in her eyes. Not just the precision of a sniper, but the burden of one. Soldiers celebrated kills in the abstract and after-action reports, in numbers tallied like scores. But behind every number was a human being. And Maria carried them all. He let the silence stretch, studying her. She wasn't bragging. She wasn't proud. She was haunted. Finally, he asked, "Why here? Why hide as a clerk?" Maria let out a bitter laugh, low and short. "Because I'm tired. Because I've given enough. Because when you're a sniper, they don't let you go home when the war ends. They just find another battlefield." I thought, if I came here, if I filed papers and handed out ammo, maybe I could disappear. Maybe I could just be nobody. Her voice broke on the last word. The colonel sat back, his expression unreadable. Part of him wanted to press further, to demand mission names, locations, classified details. But another part of him, the human part, saw the woman sitting in front of him, trembling under the weight of ghosts. He asked quietly, "Do you regret it?" Maria closed her eyes. Images flashed, scopes aligned on faces she never forgot. The sharp crack of a rifle, the stillness after. Her chest tightened. "Every night," she whispered. Halvorsen let out a long breath, rubbing his temples. He had his answer now. More than he wanted, maybe. But answers raised new questions. What was he supposed to do with her? Report her? Protect her? Pretend he hadn't heard any of it? He looked at her again. She seemed smaller now, her shoulders sagging as if confessing he'd stolen what little strength she had left. "You realize," he said slowly, "that if I file this, they'll come for you. Task Force Grey doesn't let their people walk away." Maria's eyes flicked up sharply, fear flashing for the first time. "That's why I kept quiet." The colonel studied her. For a long moment, finally, he stood. "You're dismissed." Maria blinked, stunned. "Sir?" "I said you're dismissed." She rose slowly, saluted out of habit, and left the office. When the door closed, Halvorsen sat heavily at his desk, staring at the file again. 121. The number echoed in his head like rifle shots. Maria Cortez was no clerk. She was a weapon, one the army had tried to bury, and now she was sitting on his base, a ghost among the living. Outside, Maria walked back through the night air, trembling. The reveal had come. The colonel knew. And though he hadn't said it, she could feel the clock ticking now. It was only a matter of time before someone else found out. Someone who wouldn't let her disappear again. And when that happened, the war she thought she left behind would come crashing back to her doorstep. The days following her confession to Colonel Halvorsen were unbearable. Maria still woke before dawn, still filed papers in the ordnance office, still walked the length of a firing range with her clipboard. But the air around her had shifted. Soldiers no longer treated her like background furniture. They fell silent when she passed, their whispers breaking out again the second she was gone. "That's her, the sniper. 121 confirmed kills, they say. She doesn't even blink. You notice that? People like her don't blink." The rumors spread like wildfire. Some soldiers looked at her with awe, others with suspicion, a few with fear. To them, she wasn't Maria Cortez anymore. She was a myth. A legend sitting quietly among them, disguised as a clerk. Maria hated it. Every stare was a reminder that her cover had cracked. Every whisper was a thread pulling at the fabric of her disguise. And in the back of her mind, she knew. Rumors didn't stay on bases forever. They traveled. Halvorsen called her into his office twice more that week, but the conversations were short. He asked her no further questions. Instead, he studied her like a chess piece, weighing possibilities. Maria could feel it. He was deciding what to do with her. But it wasn't Halvorsen she feared most. It was the others. The ones she had spent years trying to disappear from. Because if Task Force Grey still existed, and she knew they did, It wouldn't take long before someone higher up heard about the clerk with a sniper's aim. And when they did, they wouldn't ask permission. They would come for her. Her fears proved right one evening in the mess hall. She sat in her corner seat, eating quietly, when two men in unfamiliar uniforms walked in. Their boots were polished, their posture razor straight. They weren't from Bragg. Maria knew the look of outsiders the way a wolf knows a rival's scent. The men scanned the room, eyes sharp, movements too precise to be casual. When their gaze landed on her, Maria's heart stuttered. They didn't approach. They just lingered at the far side of the hall, speaking quietly to an officer, while stealing glances at her. Maria kept her head down and finished her meal, but every nerve in her body screamed. The shadows had noticed. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling, memories pressing in, desert nights under a scope, radios crackling with orders, targets dropping in silence. She had lived too long in that world not to recognize the signs. Someone had pulled her name. Someone was circling back. And she knew what that meant. Extraction, reassignment, or elimination. Task Force Gray didn't like loose ends. 2 days later, her suspicion was confirmed. She was leaving the office late when she noticed a black SUV parked near the edge of the base, headlights off, engine idling. It wasn't unusual for vehicles to come and go, but this one didn't move. It just sat there. Maria paused, her gut tightening. She adjusted her route, walking past at an angle, stealing a glance through the tinted window. Two silhouettes sat inside. Watching, her pulse hammered. She kept walking, forcing herself not to break stride. But once she reached the barracks, she pressed against the wall and looked back. The SUV was still there, unmoving, patient. She knew the game. They weren't here yet. They were watching, measuring, waiting for orders. The shadows were closing in. Colonel Halvorsen confronted her the next morning. He closed his office door and gestured for her to sit. His face was grim. "You've attracted attention," he said flatly. Maria's stomach dropped. "I saw them." He didn't pretend otherwise. "They're not mine. They're not Bragg's. They're higher. And they're asking questions about you." Maria clenched her fists in her lap. "Then you know what comes next." Halvorsen studied her for a long moment. "You want me to protect you?" Maria let out a bitter laugh. "You can't protect me. Nobody can. Not from them." He leaned forward, voice low. "Then tell me how to stop this before it gets worse." She shook her head. "You can't. They don't stop, Colonel. Once they find you, you either go back or you disappear for real." Her voice cracked on the last word. That night, Maria didn't return to her bunk. Instead, she walked the perimeter fence, her boots crunching quietly against gravel. The base was alive with night sounds, generators humming, voices carrying in the distance, the occasional crack of gunfire from late training. But Maria's mind was elsewhere. She thought of her locket, the only thing she had left of her brother, lost years ago in combat. She thought of every kill that number represented. 121, faces she would never forget. She had wanted to bury it all, but now the past was clawing its way back. The shadows wouldn't just close in on her. If she stayed, they'd drag Halvorsen, the soldiers, everyone on base into it too. And Maria couldn't let that happen. She had to decide, stay and be taken, or run before they caught her. The decision was made for her the next evening. She returned to her office late, only to find her desk drawers rifled through. Papers scattered, pens tossed aside, her locket half hidden under a folder. Someone had been inside. Her chest tightened. This wasn't surveillance anymore. It was a message. "We're here. We can reach you anytime." Maria sat heavily in her chair, trembling. The war she had fled wasn't gone. It had just been waiting for her to slip. And now the ghosts were at the door. Later that night, she found Halvorsen waiting outside her barracks. His face was grim, his tone sharp. "They're not asking questions anymore," he said. "They're demanding answers. Official requests. They want you moved to another location. Temporary assignment. You know what that means." Maria's breath caught. She did. It meant vanishing into the machine again, this time without hope of resurfacing. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I can't go back." Halvorsen studied her in the dark, his jaw tightening. Finally, he nodded once. "Then we need to figure out another way." Maria stared at him, stunned. She had expected him to hand her over, to let the machine swallow her again. But instead, there was steel in his voice, a promise. For the first time in years, she felt something stir in her chest. Not hope exactly, but something close. Maybe she wasn't alone this time. Still, as she lay awake that night, Maria knew the truth. The shadows weren't done. They were only getting closer. And the next move would decide everything. Whether she vanished forever into the machine, or whether she finally stood and fought the ghosts that had haunted her for so long. The night was thick with humidity, the kind that clung to skin and made every breath feel heavier. The base slept restlessly, unaware of the storm about to break. Maria Cortez stood at the edge of the range, staring into the tree line, the darkness, stretching like a wall of secrets. She knew they would come tonight. The signs had been too clear. The SUV, the rifle desk, the colonel's warning. Task Force Gray had made its move, and Maria had no illusions about what came next. They didn't send letters. They didn't knock on doors. They extracted, or they eliminated, and Maria had no intention of being either. Colonel Halvorsen found her there, rifle in hand. He didn't ask why. He already knew. "You can still walk." "Away," he said quietly. Standing beside her, Maria gave a bitter smile. "No, I can't. If I run, they'll follow. If I hide, they'll find me. The only choice I've got left is to end it here." Halvorsen studied her, the weight of command heavy in his eyes. "You're one soldier. They'll send a team." She chambered around with steady hands. "They'll regret it." There was no bravado in her tone, no boast, just the cold certainty of someone who had lived this fight too many times before. It started just past midnight. The SUV returned, this time not alone. Two more vehicles rolled quietly onto the far side of the base, engines low, lights off. Maria spotted the silhouettes slipping from the doors, black-clad, silent, moving like predators. A unit, Task Force Gray's remnants, or men trained in their image. 10 of them. Maybe 12. She inhaled slowly, scope raised, her body settling into the old rhythm she thought she'd buried. Wind speed, distance, moonlight glinting faintly on steel. They were ghosts. But so was she. The first man dropped, before his boots even touched the gravel. A clean shot through the visor, silent as a whisper. The second fell seconds later, spinning down with a suppressed gasp. The team froze and scattered for cover, but it was too late. Maria was already in the flow. 1, 2, 3. Each shot landed with surgical precision, every target collapsing in the dark. Panic rippled through the shadows. They had come to retrieve a ghost, and instead walked into a firing range where the ghost was waiting. Halvorsen's men stirred on base, alarms ringing. But Maria barely noticed. She was back in the desert, back in the cities where her number had grown with every trigger pull. 121, 122, 120-3. Every shot carried the weight of all the years she had tried to bury. By the time the last man hit the dirt, the silence was deafening. Smoke hung faintly in the air. Maria lowered her rifle, chest rising and falling, fingers trembling. The ghosts were gone, but so was her chance at staying hidden. Halvorsen approached cautiously, boots crunching on gravel. His face was grim, but there was no judgment in his eyes, only understanding. "You didn't have to fight," he said. "Yes, I did," Maria whispered. "Because they would never stop. They never stop, Colonel. You know that now." She looked at the fallen figures, sprawled in the moonlight. For years, she had counted her kills. Now, for the first time, she stopped counting by dawn. The vehicles had been dragged off, the bodies removed. Official reports would frame it as an unauthorized incursion, buried beneath classified stamps. No soldier on base asked questions. They all knew better, but whispers spread faster than reports. By noon, every man and woman at Bragg had heard. The clerk wasn't a clerk anymore. She was something else. A legend walking among them, flesh and blood. Maria hated it. But she also knew there was no undoing it now. Later that evening, Halvorsen called her into his office. His desk was stacked with folders, his expression heavy with unspoken words. "They'll keep coming," he said. Maria nodded. "I know. Then what's your plan?" For a long moment, she was silent. The choice weighed on her like the rifle in her hands. She could disappear again, bury herself under another name, another disguise. Or she could stay, face the shadows every time they reached for her, never letting them win. Her fingers brushed the locket at her neck. Inside was a faded photo of her brother, gone long ago. He had once told her something she never forgot. "At some point, you stop running and stand your ground." Maria lifted her chin. "I don't run anymore. If they want me, they know where to find me." Halvorsen's eyes softened with respect. He leaned back, exhaling slowly. "Then God help the poor bastards who try." That night, Maria sat at the range alone, rifle across her lap. The crickets sang, the stars burned steady overhead. For the first time in years, she felt still. She knew the shadows weren't gone. They would come again. They always did. But now, she wasn't hiding. The ghosts had found her, and she had answered. Maria Cortez was no clerk. She never had been. And as long as she drew breath, the world would remember the truth. She was the sniper with 121 kills, the soldier who walked out of the shadows and chose to fight, and she would never disappear again.